Am I almost tired of seeing superheroes staying stagnant and miss when they were able to grow and evolve as characters? I want to talk about that. Hey there, this is your Matt Doodle to my Thomas Hands, Doodle here with another video, and today I'll talk about how I am sick and tired of seeing my favorite characters being treated like trash just to keep them timeless and quote unquote relatable. And I'm going to use the example of Spider-Man as a character which people really love, but who hasn't changed in a very long time. And I'm going to contrast that with Superman of all characters to show someone who has been able to evolve and grow and how people seem to really love that about him. I'm going to start with Spider-Man first because he is the most egregious case of that because of everything that they've been doing him right now, especially with the comics. They have been pushing this man beyond belief to a point where this is not being relatable anymore. It's just being gross and sad. And why do you want to read about a character that's sad? I mean, there are, points where you want him to be sad because Spider-Man can be, depressed. He can be upset. He can lose his way. But I feel like the editors, I will talk about them because I don't blame the writers because they are just doing what the editors are telling him to do in most cases. But I feel like they just believe that relatability just means being bashed all the time. But I don't see that. As someone who grew reading the Spider-Man comics and seeing any Spider-Man media, I liked seeing him grow as a character from a very young age, where I wasn't even in the high school experience at the time when I was first reading it. I liked seeing him go from a kid to being an adult and then what that entails. And for me, growing up with that, I gotta see a glimpse of what life could be. I'm not saying that I was like, oh look, I can grow up to getting spider powers and be Spider-Man. I mean, when you're a little kid, that kind of happens. But I also gotta see what life could be like. Going to high school, going to college, getting a job, and seeing those progressions from a character that I really like as a kid. And seeing the highs and lows of life. And I feel like if you just keep it in the lows, it just makes us depressed as readers or viewers, depending on whatever media you're doing. Peter, at least in the early days, before One More Day, I'm not saying the comics that were happening afterwards were bad, but before One More Day, they were able to keep him growing, even if there was points where the editors would not want him to do too. Like, when Peter, got married to MJ. There was a lot of back and forth in that point of her saying no, and then he would try to propose again, then she would say no again, and then last time they finally did it, and then they actually got married. There was actually progression to that, and that was something new. Spider-Man was an adult for more of his publication history than he was a teenager, but I feel like because the teenager side of him is the most marketable, that's the part we need to focus on. But Spider-Man in the main comics is not a kid anymore. So by taking away his marriage and by making him super broke again, they're trying to put him back in that space. But that doesn't work anymore. And there have been multiple examples of how you can have Spider-Man grow and be extremely depressed in a little movie called Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Even though that's not a Peter's film, they show how to do that well by showing a Spider-Man, a Peter Parker, that had to go through everything in his life and how he went from the highs and lows of him getting married to MJ, then losing Aunt May, and then getting divorced from MJ because he didn't want kids. And then by the end of that film, he learned how he's being wrong about that and how he actually does want kids.
I love you. I'm so proud of you. Do I want kids?
And how the second film showed that how much he loves again and how much that's the highs of life. And it shows by how well this Peter was portrayed and how much people loved him. You can see how much people like an adult Peter Parker and not just an adult-like person acting like a kid. No, an actual person that grows. And it's sad also because the main comics don't do that. They've made him and Mary Jane break up and get back together so many times that it's just annoying and sad to the point where now most people want to see him with Black Cat, which is still not a good thing because she's extremely toxic for him. There's whole Paul situation, which makes a whole new layer for that I do not want to get into because he is a nightmare. But they had to make an entire new universe where Peter Parker is an adult being Spider-Man with an entire family already. And that's doing gangbusters already. I'm one of the people who actually really love that comic too. Like, I haven't even read the mainline Spider-Man comics in years because of everything they've done to that man. Which is funny because even when One More Day happened, I was a little kid. But I knew Spider-Man more as an adult in most cases before that, and I just loved that. But seeing Spider-Man push and push and push and push and not getting any wins just makes it sad. So seeing him in an alternate universe, being an adult, being a family man, and still being Spider-Man with depressing things still happening, that's what we want to see. The middle ground of that life is going to beat you, but it's not going to defeat you, if that makes sense. And that's the whole point of Spider-Man. He was a character that was a boy, a teenager, being in a complete ass and learning to be a man because of his little Spider-Man-ness. He wasn't perfect, but it's all about growth with him. So the fact that you keep him in one form diminishes the value of Spider-Man as a character to the point where other media of that character has to pull the weight of growing. And I just feel like that's, kind of sad that the main world that this character came from just doesn't do anything with it. And then that leads me into Superman. Now, that must be strange for me to do a comparison between Spider-Man and Superman since they are both from different companies and are very different characters. But they are both the top tier superheroes. When you think of superheroes, you think of Spider-Man and Superman. And where they were headed was going to be the same. But one failed and one succeeded. Now, Superman has been here longer than Spider-Man. Superman's been around since the late 30s, and Spider-Man has only been around the 60s. But they both ended up in that area where they were both going to be married and then eventually have kids. But where Spider-Man failed, Superman succeeded. Yes, I know, Superman has been through some really wacky stuff through his publication history. But one constant was his close relationship with Lois Lane. Whether they were together or not, there was always that fling type behavior. And Superman had to learn through her. Superman has always been the quote unquote Boy Scout. He's always helped people. But because of his powers, he sometimes had to, reel himself back in. And someone who helped him with that was Lois Lane, which then showed him you don't need superpowers to be a hero and that there are other ways to help. And then vice versa, he would help her be more hopeful because she was raised in a military type home where everything's a little more cynical. So that relationship dynamic was so good. And then it took them, by the equivalent of Spider-Man, it took him and Lois Lane much longer to get married. But when they did, it was a celebration. Yes, of course, people were, against it because then it would, make Superman even older. But maybe that's a difference between Superman that, people have already seen him like a dad figure, and you may be wondering why I'm comparing them. Superman also is technically the everyman. Yes, he has technically more power than Spider-Man, but he doesn't use it when he's Clark Kent. That is where they're similar. And they're also similar because Superman also had to learn self-love because he's technically an immigrant and had to accept himself from his abilities to who he is. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. And when they got married, that didn't get taken away. I know some of you are going to say that, oh, didn't they get rebooted because of the New 52? And yes, they did. But eventually, even in that version, the original pre-crisis version of Superman came back and was just living there with his wife and then had a kid, Jonathan. And he became such a staple to the point where now people wanted that version of Superman more than the New 52 version. And because of the audience wanting that more, they basically just killed off the Lois Lane and Superman of the New 52, and then in some weird shenanigan, they fuse them together. So technically now, this version of Lois Lane and Clark Kent have technically always been, but then some weird comic book things where now every comic story is canon now, which is weird. I'm not sure that kept that there, but Superman is at this point in time is still married to Lois Lane, and that has not gone away. And at this point in time too, he still has his son Jonathan, and people seem to even to really like that character too. People don't seem to really get annoyed with it. I mean, unless you're like the people who just don't like cool characters. Because Jonathan is cool. There is one thing that I don't like where they did kind of go a little too fast, is where they literally aged him up to be an adult, like very fast. I don't want anyone to say that he's bisexual. I do not care. It's actually cool seeing how supportive and, loving his parents are. It also is cool, even though I don't like it as much, to see that Jonathan Kent will eventually become Superman. Maybe it will never actually officially happen because we always want regular Clark Kent to be Superman, but it's still a nice sentiment, which is what happened technically in the 90s for Peter. He was going to have a kid, and they made an entire new universe called the MC2 on the kids of the superheroes, and that was my favorite alternate universe at the time when I was a kid. But because that was an alternate universe, they couldn't stick to it, and then they just stopped making it. And then Peter just could not evolve after that, especially after One More Day. But Superman was able to do that, and he still has life to the point where, unlike Spider-Man, where all his alternate media version is able to, grow and evolve and maybe have kids as a comeback to the comics, because they won't do it, the other media has to do it. In Superman's case, it's more of a love letter to Superman growing as a character, with, Jonathan being shown in so many iterations of Lois and Clark getting married and having a kid. And then, especially, they even had an entire show where they focused on him and his entire family with adding an extra kid. And that show was doing gangbusters. I think the show is ending at the time I'm recording this, but they made that entire thing because it's a love letter to Superman's history, and no one seems to bat an eye of him having a kid. That's the difference. And you may be saying, but don't we have shows like My Adventures of Superman? Are we focusing on that? Yes, but guess what? They already focused on Superman and Lois's relationship already, and they didn't throw it away. They didn't try to keep him, being alone. And here's one thing that I want to say. I am not against stories where they start out in their beginning stages. I like seeing those stories. I like seeing where they start, but never seeing it change gets annoying. Now, you may also say, why did I compare it so much with Peter and MJ if they are very different? Because literally in every other version of Spider-Man, there's a Mary Jane more than Gwen Stacy. So that's why I compare them, because the way they had their relationship for the longest time was like Lois and Clark. Yes, they had different dynamics. It was a loving partnership. They knew where they stood with each other, and they grew with that. But since Spider-Man is now not with MJ and can't really grow because of those shenanigans they're stuck with, they've made it sad to read Superman. But when you read Superman, it is fun, hopeful, joy. And that's what I just want for Spider-Man. Basically what Superman has gone through. All I want to see is a comfortable progression to my favorite characters. That's why I compared the two most famous superheroes together. I was going to add Batman, but honestly, I don't know too much of Batman in the comics. That's my fault. So I didn't want to say something that I don't really know about. But yeah, those are just my thoughts on why I feel like progressing a character is important and why keeping it stagnant just ruins a character in the long run. But hey, what do you think? Do you want to see Spider-Man be able to grow as a character and evolve and maybe be able to get married and have a kid? And what do you think about me comparing it to Superman, of all people? I'd really like to know. I know some of you are going to say that, it's weird that I even compare those two in general because they are very different. They have different lives. They have different abilities, different characters. But I just felt like it was important by showing those two, because these are characters I really like in both cases. But if there's something else, this has been Doodlemite. I hope everyone stays nerdy, and I hope to see everyone in the next video. Bye.